The Mongol Empire. I mean, just the name conjures up images of, well, vastness, power.
Absolutely. We're talking about the largest contiguous land empire in history. Just massive.
Yeah, 23 million square kilometers stretched from East Asia all the way to Europe. It's staggering.
And for over a century, this huge domain was run by basically one family, the descendants of Genghis Khan.
So in this deep dive, we want to give you a shortcut, really, to understanding how this empire rose, how it worked, and how it eventually fragmented.
We'll look at the strategies, the surprising facts, and the huge global impact these rulers had.
We'll see how they pulled together these scattered nomadic tribes, built this incredibly efficient infrastructure, and, well, changed world history. Often brutally, yes, but sometimes through amazing advancements, too.
Yeah, it's a complex picture.
So today we're focusing on four key great Khans: Genghis, Ogedei, Mongkut, and Kublai. We'll trace the empire's path, from nomadic beginnings to trying to become more settled, and then its division.
And we'll dig into the systems they created, military tactics, trade networks like the Yam, and their profound effects, sometimes devastating, like potentially spreading the Black Death, but also laying groundwork for things like modern diplomacy.
Okay, so let's start where it all began, with the architect himself, Genghis Khan, born Temujin. He didn't exactly start at the top, did he?
No, not at all. His early life was tough, full of conflict. But by 1206 CE, when he was already in his 40s, he'd managed to defeat his rivals on the steppe.
And that's when the famous Kurultai happened.
Exactly, this grand meeting of chiefs. It was there the nomadic tribes agreed, really for the first time, to unite under him. And that's when he took the title Genghis Khan, Universal Ruler.
His knack for overcoming rivals and basically creating a nation from scratch was, well, legendary.
It really was. Ruthless cunning, absolutely.
And his military reputation is huge. I mean, campaigns smashing through northern China, Beijing included, and Central Asia, all the way to the Caspian Sea, the Middle East.
Even into Russia by 1223, his armies were incredibly effective.
But these conquests weren't just land grabs, were they? There was a bigger strategic play.
Oh, definitely. By 1225, he controlled a huge chunk of the Silk Road. That was key.
Right, controlling trade.
It gave the Mongols immense economic leverage. They could guarantee safe passage, standardize things. It fundamentally changed East-West commerce on a scale never seen before.
But it wasn't just force. He was also a diplomat, using marriage alliances pretty strategically.
Yes, though those alliances could be quite fluid. There was this interesting case with Togrul, the Kurait Khan. An alliance was proposed, fell through. But later a pact was made with Togrul's brother, Jakagambu. It was a double deal. Jakagambi's daughter, Sorkatani, married Genghis's son, Tului. She becomes really important later, by the way.
Great.
And Genghis himself married another daughter, Ibaka. But then, literally at that same 1206 Kurultai where he became Great Khan, he publicly divorced Ibaka because he'd fallen out with her father again.
Wow, so alliances made and broken pretty quickly. It shows they were purely strategic tools.
Absolutely. Practical politics.
Beyond war and diplomacy, he laid down some revolutionary rules for his empire, like forbidding looting without permission. That must have been a shock for nomadic warriors.
A huge shock. And sharing the spoils with all warriors and their families, not just the elite, that was radical. It even caused friction with his own uncles, apparently.
And the Yasa, the law code.
Right, the Yasa. It had incredibly harsh penalties: death for dropping something during a march, for rape, obviously for resisting Mongol rule. Very strict order.
But it wasn't just about punishment, was it? It seems like it was also about building a new kind of society.
Exactly. It promoted people based on merit, not just birth. It decreed religious freedom, which was quite unusual. It exempted the poor and clergy from taxes.
And he encouraged literacy.
Yeah, using the Uyghur script for Mongolian. So the Yasa wasn't just a rule book. It was kind of a blueprint for an empire that went beyond old tribal loyalties. It laid the civic groundwork.
And the military organization itself was innovative. This decimal system units of 10, 100, 1,000, 10,000.
Arbans, Zuns, Mingans, Tumans, very logical, very efficient for command and control, plus the elite imperial guard, the Keshig.
They had natural advantages, too, being nomadic speed, archery skills.
Incredible cavalry tactics, hit and run, masters of the compound bow on horseback. But they also weren't proud about adopting technology. They learned siege warfare, used Chinese engineers and things like trebuchets to take down walled cities.
Yeah, but we have to acknowledge the dark side, too, the sheer brutality against those who resisted.
Oh, absolutely.
Right.
Collective punishment was standard policy. Cities wiped out, populations massacred. It generated immense fear, but also deep, lasting resentment. That's a crucial part of the legacy.
Okay, so Genghis Khan builds this massive foundation. Then comes his successor, Ugadai Khan, his third son.
Yeah, chosen apparently because he had a more even temperament, could keep his older, more fiery brothers in line.
So his job was more about consolidation, building on what his father started.
Pretty much. Preserve and build. And he did expand the empire further campaigns in Persia, the Caucasus, Russia, starting around 1229.
And he personally led armies in China.
Yes, he was there when they finally conquered northern China from the Jin dynasty in 1234. But the really crucial shift under Ogode was moving away from just looting conquered lands.
Towards actually governing them.
Exactly. Setting up structured administration, systems for taxation. That's the mark of an empire really putting down roots, not just a temporary conquest.
And part of that was establishing a proper capital, Karakoram, in the 1230s.
Right, a fixed center for the empire. And alongside that, he built the Yam system.
The relay post system. I find this fascinating.
It was incredible, a network of stations across the empire allowing messages and officials and even merchants to travel incredibly fast. Riders covering maybe 200 kilometers, 125 miles a day.
That's faster than the Pony Express centuries later.
Way faster. The logistical coordination required is just mind-boggling for the 13th century. It really held the empire together.
But Ogode had his issues. Sources mention heavy drinking, relying a lot on advisors, including his wife Torajane.
Yes, those seem to be accurate. And his drinking likely contributed to his death in December 1241.
And his death had immediate, massive consequences, didn't it?
Huge. Mongol armies were deep into Europe. They'd reached Hungary. But standard practice was for all princes of the bloodline to return for a Kurultai to elect a new Khan upon the ruler's death.
So the European campaign just stopped.
It effectively ended Mongol expansion westward into Central Europe. The armies turned back. Now, his death was the trigger, but modern historians also point to other factors, maybe climate issues affecting pasture land for the horses, the difficulty of taking Europe's stone castles compared to cities elsewhere.
Right, it wasn't just his death, but it was the main catalyst for the withdrawal.
Precisely. It created a pause, a power vacuum back in Karakoram, and the momentum in Europe was lost.
Which leads us to the next succession struggle, and Mongol Khan. His path to the throne sounds like it was pretty contentious.
Very contentious. Ogode's wife, Torajane, ruled as regent for a while, pushing for her own son, Guuk. But after Guuk's short reign and death, the succession was wide open again.
And this is where Monkey's mother, Sorkotani Beki, comes back into the picture. The one who married Genghis's son to Louis.
Exactly. Sorkotani was incredibly shrewd. After her husband Tului died, Ogode had actually offered to marry her, kind of standard practice. She refused, wanting to maintain her independence and power for her sons.
Smart move.
Very. She then allied with Batu Khan, the powerful leader of the Golden Horde in the west, who disliked the Ogodade branch. Together, they engineered a Kurultai that elected her eldest son, Munka, as Great Khan.
But the Ogode family didn't accept this.
Not at all. It led to serious infighting, essentially purging the Ogodade claimants. Munka came to power through significant strife and bloodshed among the descendants of Genghis Khan.
And once he was Khan, he acted decisively to consolidate power. A purge of opponents.
Immediately, Ogode's widow, the former regent Ogul Gaimish, was even executed, accused of witchcraft. Munka wasn't messing around.
What were his main priorities after that?
Administration and centralization. He launched a massive empire-wide census.
A census across that entire territory. That's ambitious.
Hugely ambitious. It was the basis for creating more complex, standardized tax and tribute policies. He also introduced unified coinage and paper money to make tax collection easier.
Trying to create a more stable financial footing for the empire.
Yes, and trying to rein in government spending, limit corruption, and maybe even ease the tax burden on ordinary people to build loyalty. These were serious reforms.
And militarily, he delegated, putting his brothers in charge of major campaigns.
Right. He sent his brother Hulagu west towards the Middle East.
And Hulagu's campaign culminated in the sack of Baghdad in 1258.
A truly momentous and devastating event. Baghdad was the center of the Abbasid Caliphate. Hulagu had the last caliph executed, rolled in a carpet, and trampled by horses, supposedly, to avoid spilling royal blood directly on the ground. It was a catastrophic blow to the Islamic world.
And his other brother, Kublai.
Kublai was tasked with continuing the conquest of southern China against the Song dynasty. Monk himself actually went south to oversee that campaign.
And that's where he died.
Yes, Monkey was killed in battle or possibly died of disease during the siege of a city in southern China in 1259.
And his death, again, throws everything into disarray.
Exactly. Another great Khan dies on campaign, another succession crisis brews. The armies pull back again, and it sets the stage for even deeper divisions, particularly between Kublai and his other brother, Bök, who was back in Mongolia.
Right, which leads us straight into Kublai Khan and the Tiluid Civil War.
A nasty 4-year conflict, 1260 to 1264, between Kublai, who had the resources of North China, and Bök, who had support from the traditional Mongol heartland.
Kublai eventually won, but his legitimacy was questioned.
It was. He'd basically convened his own Kurultai in China, while Bök held one in Mongolia. So many conservative Mongols saw Kublai as, well, not quite the legitimate Great Khan. Plus, he had this long-running conflict with another cousin, Kaidu Khan, in Central Asia, who challenged his authority for decades.
But Kublai had a different vision anyway, didn't he? He wasn't focused on being a traditional Mongol Khan.
Not entirely. His big ambition, quite unique for a Mongol ruler, was to govern like a Chinese emperor. This was a major shift.
And that led to building a new capital, Daedu, present-day Beijing, and moving the imperial center there from Karakorum in Mongolia.
A massively controversial decision. To many Mongols, it looked like he was abandoning his roots, becoming too Chinese.
Yet he still adopted a Chinese dynastic name, Yuan.
Yes, honoring Chinese tradition in that way, while simultaneously completing the conquest of the Southern Song in 1279. This made the Mongols the first non-Chinese people ever to rule all of China.
He walked a fine line, though, adopting Chinese ways but keeping Mongols as a separate, privileged ruling class.
Definitely. He needed to maintain his Mongol power base, even while ruling China in a Chinese style.
And his reign is probably the most famous in the West, largely thanks to Marco Polo.
Absolutely. Marco Polo's account of his travels and his time at Kublai's court captivated Europe and shaped its image of the East for centuries.
Kublai did achieve a lot domestically in China, building infrastructure, schools, sponsoring arts and science.
He did. Academies, trade ports, canals. Mongol records even mention over 20,000 public schools. He was a great patron of science, too, building observatories.
Following in the family tradition, like Mungi and Hulagu?
Yes, that interest in science, particularly astronomy and mathematics, was a consistent thread. Hulagu's Mariga Observatory in Persia, established under Munk's orders, was incredible. It had a vast library, maybe 400,000 books, and produced highly accurate astronomical tables.
The Occanic tables.
Those are the ones. And innovations developed there, like a mathematical device called the Tusi couple, later appear in the work of European astronomers like Copernicus. The connections are fascinating.
But Kublai's reign also saw some major setbacks, particularly military ones.
Yes, his ambitions sometimes overreached. Costly invasions of Burma and Sakhalin. He suffered really damaging defeats trying to invade northern Vietnam and Champa, southern Vietnam. They proved incredibly resilient.
And famously, the failed invasions of Japan.
2 attempts, 1274 and 1281, both ended in disaster, largely thanks to massive typhoons, the famous kamikaze, or divine winds that destroyed his fleets. Huge losses of men and resources.
So, after Kublai's death in 1294, the era of a truly unified empire under one great Khan effectively ends. It fractures.
That's right. It breaks into 4 main successor states, or khanates. The Golden Horde in the northwest, Russia, Eastern Europe, the Chagatai Khanate in Central Asia, the Ilkhanate in Persia and the Middle East, and Kublai's Yuan dynasty in China and Mongolia.
What drove this fragmentation? It seems like it was brewing for a while.
Several things. The ongoing succession disputes were a major factor, especially the rivalry between the descendants of Ogedei and Genghis's youngest son, Tului, Mongke, and Kublai's line. That fueled civil wars, like the one between Burt Khan of the Golden Horde and Hulagu of the Ilkhanate in the 1260s.
And the lifestyle clash. Nomadic versus settled.
That was fundamental. As parts of the empire became more settled, particularly the Yuan dynasty and the Ilkhanate, their interests diverged sharply from the more nomadic Golden Horde and Chagatai Khanate. There is real tension over whether to adopt the ways of the conquered peoples or stick to the traditional steppe life.
So even though the Western Khanates technically acknowledged the Yuan emperor as paramount for a time.
Yeah, there was a nominal peace declared in 1304 accepting Yuan supremacy. But in reality, they were functionally independent, often fighting amongst themselves. The unity was gone.
And eventually these khanates all declined and fell at different times.
They did. The Ilkhanate in Persia fell apart first in the mid-14th century. The Yuan dynasty was overthrown in China by the Ming in 1368, retreating back to Mongolia as the Northern Yuan. The Golden Horde broke up into smaller Tatar Khanates over the 15th century, and the Chagatai Khanate persisted in parts of Central Asia the longest, maybe into the late 17th or early 18th century.
That brought them down. Similar factors.
Often, yes. Continued internal power struggles, economic problems like hyperinflation in Yuan China, popular revolts by conquered peoples like the Han Chinese Red Turban Rebellion, and pressure from rising neighboring powers.
But there's another huge dark legacy linked to the Mongol Empire's final centuries, the Black Death.
Ah, yes. The connection is chilling and widely accepted, though the exact origin point is still debated. The plague likely originated somewhere in Central Asia within the Mongol domains.
And spread along their trade routes.
Precisely. The unified empire, the Pax Mongolica that facilitated trade, also unfortunately created the perfect highway for disease. And then there's the horrifying story from the Siege of Kaffa, a Genoese trading post in Crimea in 1347.
The biological warfare story.
It's grim. The besieging Mongol army was suffering heavily from the plague. According to contemporary accounts, they started catapulting infected corpses over the city walls.
Intentionally spreading the disease.
It seems so. Genoese merchants fled Kaffa by sea, taking the plague with them back to Italy, and from there it exploded across Europe.
The death toll is almost unimaginable.
Estimates vary wildly, but maybe 75 to 200 million people died worldwide. Up to half the population of Europe in just a few years, 50 million or so. A catastrophe directly linked to the interconnected world the Mongols had, in part, created.
And this connects to the broader debate about the sheer demographic impact of the Mongol conquests themselves, even before the plague.
Right. Some estimates suggest the conquest killed maybe 11% of the world's population at the time. Figures anywhere from 30 to 80 million deaths are thrown around.
China's population seems to have plummeted under Mongol rule.
Dropped by roughly half, from about 120 million to 60 million over 50 years. Now, how much of that was direct killing versus famine, disease, displacement, or even just administrative collapse leading to poor record-keeping that's debated by scholars?
But areas like Persia and Mesopotamia suffered terribly too.
Devastation. The Iranian plateau might have lost up to 3/4 of its population. Mesopotamia, the ancient cradle of civilization, was ravaged, its complex irrigation systems destroyed. It arguably never fully recovered its former prominence. And we have eyewitness accounts like the Friar Rogerius talking about Hungary, describing indiscriminate killing and cruelty.
That's a brutal legacy. But okay, let's shift focus. Amidst all this destruction and upheaval, there were these unexpected positive impacts, things that lasted. We touched on science.
Yeah, the patronage was significant. Ogedei worked on calendars. Munka was interested in Euclidean geometry. Huligu's Moraga Observatory was world-class. These weren't just warrior khans. Some were genuinely intellectually curious and supported scholarship.
And the YAM system and the Pax Mongolica facilitating communication and trade.
Absolutely. That network wasn't just for official messages. It made travel safer for merchants, diplomats, missionaries across Eurasia. The Silk Road flourished under Mongol protection.
So, ironically, this empire built by nomadic warriors created a period of unprecedented connection and exchange.
Exactly. Goods, technologies, think gunpowder, printing, the compass moving west, but also ideas, religions, artistic styles flowed back and forth between east and west like never before.
And the wider ripples. You mentioned Moscow rising under the Mongols.
Yes. Paradoxically, the princes of Moscow gained influence as the Mongols' chief tax collectors in Russia. They consolidated power under the Tatar yoke and were eventually strong enough to overthrow the Golden Horde and form the basis of the Russian Tsardom.
And Columbus aiming for Cathay.
Right. Europe's knowledge of the world expanded dramatically thanks to travelers like Marco Polo and others who reached the Mongol courts. Columbus sailed west, thinking he could reach the lands of the Great Khan described in those accounts. It shows how profoundly the Mongol era reshaped the global imagination.
So wrapping this up, the Mongol Empire presents this incredible paradox, doesn't it?
It really does. A force of unbelievable destruction, yet also a catalyst for unprecedented global connection.
Nomadic warriors who built lasting infrastructure, brutal conquerors who somehow fostered intellectual and commercial exchange.
And a single-family dynasty whose internal fights and shifting priorities ended up reshaping the map of Eurasia for centuries to come.
I think this deep dive really highlights that complex, mixed military power, adapting cultures, and just completely unforeseen consequences.
Yeah, it really drives home how linked the world was, even back then, and how events that seem so far away can have these massive, long-lasting global effects.
So, a final thought for you, our listeners, as you reflect on this story. Where might we see seemingly small beginnings today that could be laying the groundwork for future global shifts, maybe future empires, in ways we just can't grasp yet?
And maybe, how does the story of the Mongols, with all its contradictions, challenge our own ideas about what makes an empire great or what it even means to be civilized? Something to ponder.